like we are. How many of you are running as admin today on your desktop? I got two hands up in multiple cases. How many of you want all of your end users running as admin? How many of you have them running as admin and wish you didn't? How many of you already have them running as non-admin? Why are you here? That's really the point we're talking about today. Today's is a talk about technical debt. Things that we all wish had happened in the past, but we haven't gotten to yet. We postponed it for some reason, right? And that technical debt specifically is we have admins running on our desktops, and we'd rather not. Whether admins all the time, whether admins part of the time, whether admins that I'm pretending aren't really admins, those are ones we want to get rid of. And what does that mean, all the time, part of the time, and so forth, right? Admin all the time, the way I think about that is, I have turned off UAC and you have a local admin account, so everything is admin. You browse the web, the internet is admin. You get email, all people who send email are admin. Everything is admin all the time, just like partying on Windows 2000. It's awesome. And I think admin part of the time is, all right, well, you know what? We've turned on UAC, so even my admins look like non-admins most of the time, and every now and then they click through an elevation prompt and they do that okay. So it's admins part of the time. That's better, and there's a lot of scenarios where that's really hard to make go away, like developer scenarios in particular are hard to make go away completely. Then there's a sort of admin that you think is not actually admin, but truly is admin. That's I bought some product that automatically fixes my stuff for me by making it admin so I can pretend that I'm actually running a non-admin desktop, which we don't believe makes you a non-admin. Admin for a nanosecond is, from a security perspective, equivalent to admin between now and the end of time. Just like if someone hands you a magic lamp and says, oh, you get to make 3 wishes. If you're smart, your first wish is for infinite more wishes. And it's the same thing when you have anything running as admin. I just hope there's no code that you don't trust running. And then as soon as you put that thought in your head, you're like, that is interesting. Right? Because what are the things that you tend to put into that configuration? How many of you run software like that auto-elevates stuff? A couple folks, yeah, right? And it's interesting, we really sort of put it into perspective. No, it's safe because I'm only elevating a couple of things. You're like, well, hold on a second. Yeah, you're only elevating your oldest and worst software, which is your least trustworthy software. So we have that, and then we have the true non-admins. And that's really what we're kind of trying to get to everywhere is how do I move away from admins? And why do I move away from that? I want to talk about the approach and the way that we think of it. Part of it is money, which always comes up. Why do people like non-admin desktops? Because it costs less. If you completely bork your device and you're a non-admin, what do? You blow away the user profile and you make another one, problem solved. If you completely bork the device and you're an admin, re-image the device. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's harder to, it's more secure, right? When we talk about, from a security perspective, if I have a non-admin desktop, I can prevent a lot of end-user breaches. What is the typical route that people use when they are going and trying to capture identity across an organization? They get onto an end-user desktop, and from that end-user desktop, what they'll do is, you know what, I'm going to get you to run some code, and that code is going to try and capture things. And what I'm going to ideally do is get admin rights, which allows me to go into LSASS and take a look at all this gooey stuff that's stored in there, all the credential representations there are, grab them, and within an average of 24 to 48 hours, be able to capture whatever other credentials happen to pass through on that device. Start doing lateral traversal to get to other devices, move on, and eventually gain access to the credentials, the device, or even the entire identity infrastructure and start stealing stuff until I'm detected an average of 8 months after the initial compromise. So that's why it really matters to start removing admin rights. But what are the challenges that we face in getting to that point for anyone who still has admin desktops left or who kind of wants to complete the cycle? The two big challenges we see are, number one, how do I get the apps working again? Because usually if I'm running as admin, it's because something insists that I have to. And the second is, well, how do I actually do my legitimate job? So it's the illegitimate use of admin rights, an app that probably not deliberately requires it. It's often by accident, right? Think about how the process works. Your developers say, oh, I have to have admin rights because I'm a developer and that makes me cool. So go ahead and give them to me. So they write software that accidentally has a dependency on admin rights. They give it to you and you're like, well, this doesn't work with admin rights. It's so easy to solve. Just give them admin rights. The actual Microsoft help desk would do that. Trying to run as non-admin, our VPN solution said, oh, let's check and make sure everything's up to date. And the way it checked required admin rights. And so if you called to say you guys need to fix this, I would say, oh, yeah, we could easily fix that for you. We're just going to go into group management and just add yourself to the administrators group. Like that's not a solution. Really, really common. So let's talk through it. On the app compat side, and I know I talked yesterday about how from a point of getting to an agile platform, we want to move away from the legacy way of doing things, which is go find everything, rationalize it, test it all, and fix anything that's broken. If you're starting from a point where you don't know, that's really how you build up that initial library, right? So how do we go through and do discovery and figure out all of the things that I have or don't have if I don't already have an awareness of what the applications are that I ought to be managing? And there are all kinds of ways to do that. I'm not going to exhaustively go through that, but the idea is let's go through and understand what's running on the devices that potentially puts me at risk as I start to take away admin rights. Then to think about bringing those down into that framework that we discussed, where we understand what are our managed apps that we're going to provide some guarantee and have looked at before we move, if I don't already have that initial list. What are my supported apps? What are the ones that I'm going to take calls on? What's unsupported? What am I not going to take calls on? And what's banned? What am I going to actively try to stop from running? And furthermore, within my managed applications, what are my most important ones? Gold, silver, and bronze is a great taxonomy I often see used because it's an Olympic metaphor that resonates with a lot of people, that they get it. Like, bronze is still good. It's just not as good as the gold medal. So therefore, I'll focus more. The challenge then comes in terms of assessment. How do I determine what's going to potentially be impacted? And I spoke yesterday about some of the statistics that we see on static analysis approaches being used today, right? They're kind of not so good when you look at some of the migrations that people are looking at, like IE migrations, a lot of folks going from IE8 to IE11. The stats aren't really terrific, but the statistics were very good on XP retirements. And the thing about retiring Windows XP is that a lot of the app compat issues were driven by the transition away from the assumption of admin by default. If you postpone that, those tests are still as valuable as they once were. So we still consider this to be a really valid component of admin rights removal, is to use those static analysis approaches in addition to, we call sort of an industrialized approach, which is basically, just lots of nerds poking at it. Again, working the statistics. If I stick, an arbitrary person in front of an application doing what we within Microsoft refer to as install launch testing, what we find is that statistically speaking, if I sit there and just do an install, do a launch, and poke at it for a bit, I can actually find a really good percentage of outcomes, whether it works or doesn't. I can't find all the bugs, but I'll find something broken during that process a very high percentage of the time. It's about 96% of the time. So it ends up being also another reliable method to go down, is just have someone kind of bonk at it for a while and see what happens. The final test always ends up being user acceptance testing to see whether or not it works, and then to fix the things that don't. And that's kind of what I want to focus on today is how do we fix it, right? So the first half, and then we're going to talk about the legitimate use of admin rights next. Let me go into duplicate mode so you can see my desktop. And kind of talk about the tools because, we've talked about these quite a lot in the past. But if you weren't doing an admin rights removal project at the time, it may not be interesting at the time, but now it may be suddenly more interesting. One tool I wanted to point out is a tool called Lua Buglight. Lua Buglight is a tool written by a friend of mine. His name is Aaron Margosis, and he has been passionate about running as non-admin ever since 2003. He's been doing it and trying to evangelize it. And he wrote this tool called Lua Buglight years and years ago. This was back in 2004 and 2005 to create this tool, originally targeted towards helping customers who were on Windows XP who wanted to run as non-admin. And then when Windows Vista came out, they took his other idea, and that's actually a little fascinating bit of history. When you start thinking about what it takes to have an impact, I always like to point this out. It's surprising the impact you can have without knowing it. He honestly had no idea that he had this impact. So Aaron wrote a tool specifically designed to work around this flaw we had inside of our VPN solution that made it so that it was impossible for him to VPN in and be a standard user. He didn't like that so much, so here's the approach that he wrote. It's a little script, and here's what the script does. The script takes your admin credentials, so you type them in using runas.exe. It'll take your admin credentials, but then in that context, add your user account to the local admins group, create a command window with that account, with this admin membership, and then remove you from the local admins group, and then that process would die. Now you've got a command window with you as admin, but the rest of Explorer and everything else is you as a regular user. Neat little idea that became UAC. From a script he posted on a blog on the internet. No idea that had happened. He actually went up to the program manager of UAC. Did you get this idea from me? Yeah, we totally did. We totally ripped that off. We just made it cleaner and better. It's exactly where it came from. So never underestimate the power you could have as a lone person with a voice, because having a voice is really important. And this Lua Buglight tool as well, he wrote to help with that. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, what it's doing is actually going to cause me to elevate, and it's actually a really neat architectural approach. What it does is it actually creates two tokens for you and keeps them both in the same process. It tries all of the potentially privileged operations first with the non-elevated token, and if that fails, it will retry with the elevated token. And if that works, then it will report it, which is really interesting, right? Because now the number of false positive gets really, really low because you watched it fail, then you watched it work. There's not too many times when that's going to end up giving you a false positive. So you can start clicking around the application and saying, oh, I'm going to save something here, and maybe I'll go into the options and record that. And when I go and close it, say stop logging, it'll automatically open up the reporter, and the reporter will give me all kinds of details about what potentially happened. Right, so here, I'm trying to write to here, right? That's a file system issue, and if I look at the bottom, it'll say, hey, they failed a standard user succeeded. Here's the file that goes in. Here's some solutions, right? File virtualization, correct file paths, loosening permissions, lots of different options as well. How do you fix it? Some guidance. Here are the registry keys it was trying to read or write. Here are the checks for group membership. To kind of detail, here are the things that went wrong so you know what to fix. Then, of course, the next question is, how do I fix it? Right? And this is the conversation because so many people want to hit the easy button. Well, we'll just elevate it and make that go away. Well, you don't have to. We can go through and fix a lot of these things without having to actually give you admin rights. So I'll go ahead and use the Compatibility Administrator tool. So still available as part of the Windows 10 ADK. So for those of you who kind of lost track of the App Compat Toolkit, the App Compat Toolkit got merged in with the Assessment and Deployment Kit back for Windows 8. And it still sort of lives in there. To be honest, nearly nothing has changed. We haven't really been investing a whole lot in it, but for folks who are still coming off of older systems, Coming off of Windows 7, the version lies can be really, really helpful. There are still some people who are on Windows XP, so that can be useful. So it's still available and still useful for those, as well as some of the retirement of some of the legacy technical debt that you may or may not have. But we'll kind of quickly go through how we can go through and apply some fixes. So it's a stock viewer. It's by me. And it's in program files, stock viewer, stockviewer.exe. And the next mode, just kind of refresh. How many of you have actually seen all this before? So most people have. All right, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, just a little bit of a light refresher. So it talks about compatibility modes and kind of the easy button, if you will, that maps up to groups of shims. But I want to go and do some specific fixes, like force admin access, right? That was the initial group check. So if we go back to our Lua bug light report, right, this group check is checking to see whether I'm a member of the administrators group. Force admin access, I think, has a very deceiving name. It sounds like it's actually going to force it to have admin access, which is not how it works. Instead, it will actually just intercept the Windows APIs in order to return a different value, right? So the particular API this one is calling is the isUser and admin API, right? And if you look at the actual source code for the shims as implemented by it, that is the totality of the source code for that particular shim. Is the user an admin? Yeah, they are. Nothing more to it. In fact, from a performance perspective, that's one of the questions I get, which is, well, how does this impact the performance of the application if I put shims on it, right? So the first thing I usually answer is, well, normally that's not a concern because you're dealing with applications that are older anyway. So just running on newer hardware tends to make it pretty fast regardless compared to what they're used to, number one. Number two, it depends on which shim you're putting in place. If the shim you're putting in place is, is user and admin, right, for the force admin access, it turns out this is way faster than actually looking at your group memberships to see if one's in there. It's nearly instantaneous, so it did get faster. Others will go potentially slower. So is user and admin automatically fixes that. And we'll look at some of the other things that it pointed out for us, like, hey, you're here from a registry perspective. I'll just fix a couple of these. I'm not going to exhaustively go through everything. This is trying to write things into HK classes root. And I point this one out because this one that we actually see in the real world kind of a lot. Here, let me zoom in. I keep forgetting how small that screen looks from back there. HK classes root happens a lot. And the reason why it happens a lot is because we, Microsoft, helpfully wrote that code for you. If you take Visual Studio 6 and take Visual C++ 6, and during the project creation checklist, you check a checkbox that says, make this an ActiveX EXE, we will generate the code to write that Lua bug for you. You're welcome. For free! We didn't even charge you extra for that feature. So you run into this kind of a lot. It's really, really easy to fix with a fix we call virtualized HKCR Lite. And this just really takes advantage of the way that COM works. So COM is still very much a part of Windows. It's not sexy anymore. Don Box doesn't get to make millions talking about it anymore. He's still doing just fine, by the way. He's a distinguished engineer at Microsoft now. He just doesn't talk in public very much, which kind of makes me sad because I thought he was one of our great presenters, but that's beside the point. The way COM works is you've got the registry key that's called HKey classes root. But there's no actual such thing as HKey classes root. It doesn't exist. It's a virtual merge of HKey local machine / software / classes and HKey current user / software / classes. And we just bring those together and make them look like one thing. You can do per user registrations and per machine registrations. And we'll actually look per user first. So what this virtualized HKCR Lite does is says, oh, if you're trying to write to HKLM, just redirect it to HKCU, which you can write to as a standard user, and everything's fine. Right? Why can you write to it? The way I simplified it in my head is to think of it as, can you affect other users on the device or the device itself? If the answer is yes, it's an admin operation. If the answer is no, then it's a standard user operation. And that actually works relatively well. Can I write to my documents? Well, everyone has their own my documents. So if you write, you can only mess up your own stuff. Fine, you can mess up your own stuff. Can I write to somebody else's? Nope, not allowed. What about program files? That's shared. I could potentially mess up other people, so that's an admin operations. Windows, shared, admin operations. Local machine, shared, admin operation. This is not shared. Everyone has their own HKey current user, so you get to write to it. And that's all we're doing. One other thing I'll point out before we'll go in is that I'm going to actually go in and add parameters. And this is something that may be new if you've not done this since Windows 7. In Windows 7, even actually dating all the way back to Windows 2000, we have some concepts in terms of the shim infrastructure, and we actually first introduced it in Windows 2000, called the global include and global exclude, which is no matter what the shim, we're going to automatically include and exclude some stuff. And Windows 7 and Windows Vista, which is really the two where it mattered the most, we had a global exclude for the .NET framework. There was a bug, however, in the global exclude code, so it never got applied. So none of the global excludes were actually excluded. We fixed the bug, which started to exclude them. My app is a managed app, so therefore it's going to be excluded. So I need to get it included. Well, live Zoom is not working so well. All right, and I'm lazy, so I'm just going to do an include star. And what this is going to say is just include everything, right? Because normally the global exclude is going to exclude things in the Windows directory. Our assumption being, if we wrote it, it really ought to be compatible, right? So we're not going to shim it. So we don't end up shimming, kernel 32 or user 32 or other things are mainline on the system. This just says, you know what? Apply this shim across the board, which will grab the .NET framework and everything. If I wanted to get really precise and I weren't trying to careen through a presentation in 35 minutes or 45 minutes, then I would be much more specific. But this is just going to make sure that we get everything. And I'll do the same thing in force admin access. I'm going to make sure I include everything so that the .NET framework actually gets done. And I point this out because this is changed from Windows 7, where you didn't have the global exclude actually functioning, so therefore it didn't help you. So we go through and apply that, and then we'll go ahead and save it. This is the app manage event, and fortunately I get to name it twice. I've got a backup ready in case something goes wrong. It's like Julia Child. I've got the cake already out of the oven. Right-click install, and for those who for those who don't like the magic of a tool, how we would actually install this on a local user workstation with the sdb-inst command, which can be used to run it silently. So single line of script, and it popped up because sdb-inst lives in system32, which is nearly all the time in the system path. So just to kind of show you what the end user deploy looks like. Again, this is repeats for a lot of folks, refreshers. I'm going to point out what's new, but this is just sort of something to keep in mind. It's really easy to go through and distribute these, but with this installed, now I can go back and launch the application, and it's going to pass the initial check. It's not going to gripe at me, and it will let me go into options and not have an error, and just to show what that was like before, since we never actually ran it broken, I can go and uninstall it. So if I right-click here and uninstall, now we're back to broken. That's the error that we got passed with force admin access. And here's the error that we got passed with our registry change. So with this, when I start talking to folks who say, I really want to get rid of my admin rights, I want to get over this last mile, there are not that many things we're unable to fix using this approach. A lot of people can make a lot of headway with a basic knowledge of how to apply these shims. And then we just look to say, hey, listen, if you've got something that's harder, there is still a group of, really hardcore app compat nerds out there who can help to troubleshoot and understand the really gnarly issues. And there's just a couple of exceptions that I know are really difficult for us to fix. The one I've actually run into just in a couple of circumstances is if I'm trying to enable a privilege that I don't have. I'm not aware of a way to fake that out in a reliable way to get that to happen. So that's a tough one. So this is the general approach that we use, right? We'd either get a new version that works as a standard user, or we would take shims and provide a short-term fix to get the applications we already have running as a standard user, really, really effective. So we don't have to take the shortcuts of actually running something or everything as an admin. While we're in here, we can also notice that, hey, it looks like Emmet is using shims and IS Express is using shims. It's kind of interesting to see what's happening. In terms of the evolution of the shim database, just kind of a sidebar here, and the things that we think about, what we have noticed from a security perspective is that people have learned, hey, shim databases are kind of an interesting place to hide. Right? And from a security perspective, it's sort of interesting to see the evolution of security thought. Security people would say, in order to install one, you have to be an admin already. So you've actually not done anything new. And it's true. You've already given them admin rights. They were able to install the shim database. Right? The thing is that historically, there's very little anti-malware that's looking in the shim database to see if there's an adversary hiding there. So you get on, you plant your shim database, you get off, but you can stay hidden and gain access and do all kinds of things in a way that's relatively undetected, which is kind of an interesting exploit. So we've been taking some moves, and in Windows 10, we have new rules around what shim DLLs we will allow you to apply. And you can no longer just apply arbitrary DLLs of your choice, which historically you could do if you reversed engineer the system. You could put new stuff on there. Interestingly, that's actually why Emmet broke. If you use the previous shipping version of Emmet, which is 5.2, it didn't work because it relied on the ability to put in arbitrary shim DLLs injected to the shim engine. There's a beta release now of Emmet 5.5 that obeys all the rules and just does the things it needs to do in different ways. Right, so that's a little bit of background on some of the thinking we've been doing about shims and how to make them even more secure, despite the fact that we thought the admin barrier was interesting. There actually are other things that are interesting to think about beyond that. So that's how we think about, right, detecting, fixing, and right, kind of a refresher for those who haven't gone through and done app compat shimming and all of that for a while. The other half of how do we think about getting out of admin rights is, well, how do I make sure I'm doing all of the things that I'm now on the hook to do? Because when I have people who are local admins, sometimes it's because the apps don't work and I feel that I don't have to. But more and more, we're starting to see folks where they just don't have a good management infrastructure in place. They're not able to do all of the administrative tasks, so they rely on the end user's ability to do that. Right? And that's another opportunity when we talk to folks. Through automation, right? How do I start to automate these tasks so it's not manual? Right? And it's a little bit scary. I should show you. You know what? Let's see if direct access is connected. It is. I can show you how Microsoft distributes software, which will probably terrify all of you. But this kind of assumption is not that unusual. Sure, I agree to show this. Yes, let me. Presenter view automatically switches me to extend mode and doesn't put me back. All right, well, we've actually changed this now. And we say go to there, but so we have the company portal now to do stuff. Vendors should use it. But until very recently, here we go. We would just point to a file share. Let's see if I can navigate to it. And you would just pull everything off of a file share. With a web-based front end that had links to a file share, and that's how we installed software. We have only very recently transitioned to Company Portal and Configuration Manager, right? And that's true for a lot of people. So we've got this transition ahead of us. How do we get people being able to do that? A lot of it is let's get the systems in place, right? I've noticed a lot of people have very unhealthy systems manager, whether it's Configuration Manager or Altiris or BigFix or all of the different options that are out there, right? Obviously, we like ours, but you just got to have something. But the next one is if you are going to take away admin rights from everyone, they are no longer going to be able to do a double-click install, which means you have to have everything packaged. Right? We saw a big influx in Windows 7 migrations that everyone's sort of repackaging everything. It was sort of assumption, well, if we're moving OSs, you have to repackage it. And, it's probably more than a handful of packagers here. You know that you didn't actually have to repackage everything. I had one customer where part of their packaging standard had a custom action that had a version check for XP in it, in every single package. So we just had to go through and we actually scripted removing all of it. But a lot of people have stuff that just isn't packaged that now we've got to figure out some way of getting it installed. So the packaging process and assisting that automation, building in things like Orchestrator, going to System Center, getting approval flows, right? A lot of that work remains in front of us, right? So I'm not going to go into all the details there, but I do want to talk about ways that we think about doing manual management when help desk has to connect, because I think this is something that a lot of people are still struggling to solve. The most common approach that we see for help desk reaching out and getting onto an end user desktop is one of two things. Number one, the person who works at the help desk gets added to the help desk group that has admin rights on every device. Now, of course, that's perfectly safe because the help desk people, the people who work there, right, that's the job that everyone hopes for and strives for. Usually at your company 30, 40 years before you get promoted to help desk, right? Or maybe it's a brand new guy who you don't even know, right? That's more often the case. I don't even know who this person is, and yet they now own everything in the environment. Isn't that strange? Why do I have to have one-to-all administration? That's very risky. So you can do that with training, right? So the way that we would approach that today is we would say to have this help desk supergroup with admin rights everywhere. I would definitely say admin rights only on workstations. Don't put it on servers. Don't put it on domain controllers. Don't just say all devices. Tier it off and isolate as much as you can. But then you also need to make sure that they are always connecting in a safe way. So if I connect through remote desktop, I have the ability to connect with a switch that will say, don't actually provide my credentials over the network. And that way the credentials don't appear on that device. Because what we've been seeing as a tactic that adversaries use when it comes to those credentials is they know help desk people often have rights, admin rights, on every device. So if you're an adversary, what do? You're going to reach out, get onto a device, and start making it misbehave. Even if you're not an admin, you make it misbehave so that they call the help desk. And then when the help desk connects, you grab their credentials, and now you're admin everywhere. And that's a very commonly used tactic. So we want to make sure that we're not just having that out there as an approach that we can use for the adversary to get inside. We want to connect in so that we're doing it securely. There are other ways that we think can even further improve upon that. Right, so whether we do, and this is sort of a matter of, I don't know if this is resolved yet. There's a lot of people who are talking about this. The way that we tend to think of as being the safest way is to have one-to-one admin rights using a local account. So that way it's not your account with privileges everywhere. You just grab credentials to that device and local credentials there. And we released a tool called the Local Admin Password Solution that came out Not too long ago. It was, what, a few months ago? And I'll kind of give you a little bit of a tour of what that's all about. I'll go into the group policy editor. And I've got to fix up these two errors one of these days, but I've been far too lazy to do that. And go into the admin templates, and I have added the local admin password solution templates to here. Now, I'm not actually running a full domain, so I don't actually have it put in there, but here's the idea of what it does. You have an agent that runs on every single desktop. And what the agent will do is it will generate for either the well-known administrator account, whether you've renamed it or not, it uses the well-known SID, the 500 RID account, and automatically generate a unique password for it. And you can put in password complexity to say, well, how much should it be? If I go into the password settings, right, I can enable that and configure and say what are the sets that I want to use, letters, right, capital and lowercase, numbers, specials, right, the default is everything. How long should it be? How long should it persist until it resets? I can define all these based upon my organizational requirements to define the password, and it will generate automatically a random password on every single device, and then it will store those passwords in Active Directory. Then you can go and fetch them. So it's going to store them in a restricted attribute. So it's not going to be, you can't just do a search and find everyone's thing. Obviously, you want to be able to restrict who has access to it, and you have access control on that to say, now it's going to be stored in here. I can go and fetch them one at a time and get one-to-one admin rights by pulling it that way. It actually uses a very similar approach to how we would have stored BitLocker keys, which is we'd store them in a restricted attribute in Active Directory, and you can go and pull the key out to help someone get reset if they need their unlock key. Question? You do need to extend the schema, and there's a PowerShell script that will do the extension for you as well. But it is an extension because we need to add that attribute. So the details here, right? This is the operations guide, and it walks you through the process in the operations guide of how to extend the schema. And let's get into here's how to prep it, right? So a really fairly straightforward command, update admin password AD schema. We'll run through and create the extension. So you do have to extend the schema to be able to support that, but then it tucks away the values into that attribute that you can go through and query. And we also, if I can spell correctly, provide a UI that the help desk could use to say, oh, hey, I'm going to go into this computer and go through and search it. Now, I'm not actually connected to a domain controller. I'm connected to the Microsoft domain controllers where I don't have permission to read this because I don't work for the help desk there, and pull them up one at a time, right? But this very straightforward UI for going through and grabbing that, or whether you incorporate your own as well, right? Again, it's just using commonly known things to be able to pull it, right? But from an overall approach, think about how that can really restrict your ability to do this. If I'm an adversary and I gain control of an endpoint, and I wait for the help desk to come, the help desk logs in with a local account. If you're going to grab their credentials, you're probably already an admin. Now you've got another set of admin credentials on the same device, which you could have changed anyway, because you're already admin on the device. You could reset their password. You've not gained any further ground. We've stopped you at that ingress point, and you've not been able to go further. Problem number one that we've managed to reduce in severity. The other thing is, because you have a random password on every device, you can't take knowledge of the local admin password to gain access to every other device, because that's another very common ploy. Hey, I found this one, and if it's the same on all of them, if I just authenticate across the network, right? I mean, there's a group policy to shut this down, but a lot of people don't have this configured yet because it was backported to Windows 7 and not everyone applied it. Now I can start authenticating to other devices, or if I know it in clear text, I could type it. There are lots of things that you can do with that, and that having it be randomized help to severely reduce the damage that can potentially be caused by that. The other thing that you could potentially do, all right, if you don't like local passwords, is we're seeing some people who are doing some automation to say, you know what, I can have groups set up to give you rights to particular things, and I'll dynamically add you or remove you from those groups. We in particular see this being done on the server side. If I'm the SQL Server admin, right, you don't want to necessarily walk around with all of the privileges you might ever need all of the time. In fact, more and more we see administrators who don't need to have their rights all the time. They just need them occasionally, so we can automate the workflow. In fact, the new Microsoft Identity Manager has a privileged account module, privileged account management module that will dynamically add you and remove you. And you can start to build some time-based constraints on that to say, listen, I need these credentials for a while, but not all the time. And that way you're not carrying around all of this value all the time. That's the principle of most privilege. If I might need it, have it all the time. And we want to transition to the principle of least privilege. Only have what I need at the time and then make it go away, so that if someone steals my credentials, they would have to get lucky and steal them at the right time. And that's really kind of how we think about it. You know, we, from a security perspective, have really transitioned to, we want to try to prevent breach. We want to do the best we can. We've been investing a lot in that. If you look at what we've been doing with Windows 10, the ability to have Credential Guard, which actually takes the LSAS memory that stores credentials and protects it with the hypervisor, right? So now it's taking advantage of what we call VTLs, or virtual trust levels. It's analogous to the way that the Intel microprocessor architecture does rings, right? We have ring 3 and ring 0 code. Ring 3 is user mode, ring 0 is kernel mode. VTLs are above that. It actually exists even below ring 0. Right, so VTL 0 is where your 2 rings of kernel mode and user mode run. VTL 1 is where our trusted code runs. It's the same thing we do with Device Guard that protects the enforcement of particular processes running to make AppLocker even more reliable, right? Even if you have someone who gains admin rights, here we lock them up so that even kernel mode code doesn't have access to that because it's at a higher trust level. We still want to protect against breach as best we can, but we have to assume that eventually somebody is going to get in, and in protecting to make sure that someone doesn't get in, we want to help make sure that even if they do, that's as far as they can go, right? Starts with having non-admins and carries on with even making your legitimate activities. Minimize the amount of risk to the environment so that now I can have a managed, lockdown, and easy to, keep safe environment so that even if a breach happens, which we assume will, I don't lose the entire organization. Thank you very much.